Hello, I'm Steve Hounsell, Chair of the Ontario Biodiversity Council. I'd like to welcome you to the launch of the State of Ontario's Biodiversity 2020 report. Before I offer some high-level remarks about our report, I'd like to respectfully recognize and acknowledge the lands where we reside and from where we work. Since time immemorial, the Indigenous peoples were self-reliant and well provided for through their own ingenuity and use of the gifts of the land, living in harmony with the balance of nature. We, the Ontario Biodiversity Council, acknowledge that the land we meet on and strive to protect is the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe Chippewas peoples, but now is home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I'd also like to recognize the critically important role of our Indigenous peoples in conserving biodiversity as teachers of traditional knowledge, for promoting and enlightening us on ethical space and two-eyed seeing, and as valued members of the Ontario Biodiversity Council. So what do we mean by the term biodiversity? It's a term that refers to the variety of life on Earth. It includes the diversity of ecosystems found on Earth, the species that make up those ecosystems, the genetic diversity associated with each of those species, and the ecological and evolutionary processes that keeps those ecosystems functioning and species ever evolving. Ontario, as I'm sure you know, is a vast ecologically diverse province, covering more than 1 million square kilometers, and indeed is larger than many other countries of the world. From rich deciduous forests in the south to Arctic tundra along the coast of Hudson Bay, it is a home to an exceptional array of ecosystems, flora and fauna, supporting more than 30,000 species. That rich biodiversity also provides the renewable resource base and critical ecosystem services that sustains a vibrant, healthy, and prosperous society. Our challenge and task is to conserve and sustainably manage Ontario's biodiversity, both for its own sake and to protect what sustains us. On behalf of the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and as a member of the reporting committee of Council, I am pleased to be able to provide some highlights from the State of Ontario's Biodiversity 2020 report. This is the third State of Biodiversity report produced by the Ontario Biodiversity Council, the first being released in 2010 and the second in the spring of 2015. Reporting on a rough 5-year cycle will enable us to assess broad trends and enable us to determine whether the implementation of Ontario's biodiversity strategy is indeed achieving its goals and serving to protect what sustains us. This report also serves as a report card against Ontario's Biodiversity Strategy 2011, which formally ended last year in 2020. I encourage you all to go to our website, ontariobiodiversitycouncil.ca, and explore our State of Ontario's Biodiversity Report and all of its underlying data. Now, this was a major undertaking, drawing upon data from a variety of organizations, both government and non-government. It also involved the support of a number of fine people from government, the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and others who were involved in the analysis, writing, and review of indicators, and indeed this report. The writing team consists of Rochelle Gagnon, Therese McIntosh, Sarah Higginson, and Scott Poser, all from the Biodiversity Secretariat of the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources, and Forestry. They are a superb team who deserve recognition. I sincerely thank them for all of their efforts. To assist, advise, and review drafts of the report, a reporting committee of the Ontario Biodiversity Council was formed that worked closely with that writing team. Indeed, we also reached out beyond Council to ensure we had the appropriate depth of expertise for the task that was at hand. Those members include Tom Willans from Trent University, Dan Krause from Wildlife Conservation Society, Canada, Rob Keane from Forests Ontario, Laura Timms from the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, Heather Braun and Andrea Kettle from Environment and Climate Change Canada, Colin Casson from the Invasive Species Centre, Michelle Cantor from Carolinian Canada Coalition, Yarmo Jalaba from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Environment Office, and myself. The effort was impressive, and the results forthcoming from the report are noteworthy. We believe the results of this report must be shared with Ontarians, and we are looking to you to help spread its major messages. Perhaps most importantly, this report serves as an information source to better focus our efforts to conserve Ontario's biodiversity as we look towards the renewal of Ontario's biodiversity strategy to 2030. First, I'd like to put Ontario's state of biodiversity into a broader global context. The Global Biodiversity Outlook Report 3, released in 2010 by the Secretariat for the Convention on Biological Diversity, revealed that globally, pressures on biodiversity were increasing and that the rates of decline for most groups of species had continued. It concluded that the world had failed to achieve the global target of reducing the rate of biodiversity loss by 2010. What followed was the development of a new 10-year global strategic plan for biodiversity and some 20 global targets known as the Aichi targets to help focus efforts and achieve the results we were all seeking. The Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 report, issued last year in 2020, was a report card on global progress against those Aichi targets. It was a harbinger of bad news on the global state of biodiversity. We failed to achieve a single target, although we partially achieved 6 of the Aichi targets, including making progress on protected and conserved areas and invasive species. The point is this: in spite of our global efforts, we continue to lose natural habitats. Vast numbers of species are threatened with extinction, and globally damaging government subsidies continue, exceeding $500 billion in US equivalent funds annually. We are spending in the order of 4 to 5 times as much destroying nature as we are in saving it. We are not on track to achieve the 2050 global vision for biodiversity. That must change. Based on the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report, also issued in 2020, there has been a 68% global decline in populations of vertebrate species between 1970 to 2016, with a 94% decline in the neotropics. Freshwater vertebrates are at greatest risk and have declined by 84% globally. The extinction rate of plants is more than twice that of vertebrates. Upwards of 1 million species are currently threatened with extinction. These are alarming results. We have been exceeding the biocapacity of the planet since around 1970, and that is correlated with dramatic losses of biodiversity and decline of the ecosystem services that sustain us and our health and prosperity. That does not bode well for nature or for humanity. That has been affirmed yet again by the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services that was produced by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It's a very credible report. These alarming results have called for increased international action for transformative change and an integrated response to the immense issues of our time, biodiversity loss and climate change, as we work towards a nature-positive world, living in harmony within nature, a key to achieving the Global Sustainable Development Goals. We must get out of our issue and institutional-based silos. It is a path that I believe we must take. Canada, often referred to as the nature nation, is better off than many other nations of the world, although we too failed to achieve a single national target. World Wildlife Fund's Canada's Living Planet report, issued last year in 2020, revealed a 59% decline of Canadian species at risk since 1970, in spite of all of our recovery efforts. In broad strokes, that same story repeats itself for Ontario, although I think we can safely say that Ontario is better off than many other jurisdictions, but still far from where we need to be. Indeed, we have the potential to be seen as a leader in biodiversity conservation efforts. We need to seize that potential, make it happen, and encourage others to follow. That remains one of our collective challenges. The State of Ontario's Biodiversity 2020 report builds upon the web-based platform that we developed for 2015. It combines both state of and progress reporting, along with a brief summary report. The details, including background data, can be found on the Ontario Biodiversity Council website. This web-based report also has the advantage of making updates much easier as information becomes available. Our report includes some 26 indicators related to pressures on biodiversity, state of ecosystems and species, and conservation response, meaning what we are doing to enhance conservation efforts. Those indicators are also used to assess our progress in implementing Ontario's biodiversity strategy, a 10-year strategy that was released in June of 2011. More specifically, we have reported progress against 15 time-bound targets, which align with our 4 strategic directions of engaging people, reducing threats, enhancing resilience, and improving knowledge. These targets help to focus our efforts while broadly aligning with both national and international efforts, including the global ACHI targets. This report serves as a report card on our performance. So how are we doing? In terms of our progress against Ontario's biodiversity strategy targets, we have mixed results, which is a common theme with virtually all other jurisdictions. Some progress has been achieved on all targets, but only 3 of the 15 targets have been achieved, and those pertain to targets on engaging people and reducing threats. Of the remaining 12 targets, meaningful progress has been achieved for 8 targets, which I suspect is better than most other jurisdictions. Overall, our greatest progress pertains to efforts related to engaging people and reducing threats. We continue to lag in achieving targets associated with enhancing resilience, something we must do to both slow down the rate of biodiversity loss and to become truly restorative. Let's go just a little deeper. At a high level, we are making some good progress against targets set for engaging people about biodiversity. We've made significant progress on target 1. We have fully integrated biodiversity into the primary and secondary school curriculums, but we have more work to do for post-secondary schools and schools of business. In short, we want to ensure our next generation of leaders fully understand their connections to and dependence upon biodiversity. And we are getting there. Indeed, biodiversity is well understood by our young people. It is the older generation who need to catch up, but we are making progress. We did achieve target 2. By 2015, 50% of Ontarians understand biodiversity and its role in maintaining their health and well-being. In fact, our surveys indicate that 74% of Ontarians were aware of biodiversity, and the majority of those respondents agreed it is important to their health. Frankly, this is very good news and was better than many of us were expecting. Our effort in building societal awareness about biodiversity is working. We still have more work to do in terms of target 3. By 2015, the number of Ontarians who participate in biodiversity conservation opportunities is increased by 25%. In short, we need to both encourage and provide more opportunities for Ontarians to engage in stewardship and restorative actions. We can do this. We also have more work to do with target 4, which pertains to mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors, notably in terms of integrating biodiversity within business and financial institutions. Conserving and sustainably managing biodiversity must become a job for all, not just for some of us. That is also true for target 5, integrating biodiversity considerations into relevant policies and programs. We are making good progress, but it needs to become seamlessly integrated into policy and programming areas, much like the notion of prevention of pollution or waste reduction. We are also making meaningful progress on targets pertaining to reducing threats. We did achieve target 6. By 2015, plans for climate change mitigation are developed and implemented and contribute to Ontario's target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 6% below 1990 levels. Ontario's Climate Change Action Plan has been successful in reducing greenhouse gas emissions to about 8% below 1990 levels. The closure of Ontario's coal-fired plants contributed greatly to the achievement of that target. But clearly, this is a huge issue with plenty of scope for greater progress, notably in the transportation and building sectors. The recent COP26 meetings has made that abundantly clear, as has the need to pursue nature-based climate solutions. We also achieved target 7. Strategic plans are in place to reduce the threats posed to biodiversity by invasive species. Ontario's Invasive Species Act and associated strategic plan provides a strong framework for reducing threats to biodiversity caused by invasive species, as does the very impressive work of the Invasive Species Center and many other council members and local practitioners. These are both notable and important achievements and certainly deserve recognition and continued effort. We still, however, have more work to do. Indeed, there is still more to be done in terms of Target 8, reducing harmful pollutants, and Target 9, further reducing our per capita ecological footprint, giving a growing human population and a relatively fixed provincial biocapacity. We are definitely making progress, but again, there is much more that we must do. We need to live within the means of nature, meaning its regenerative as well as waste assimilation capacities. Although we are making good progress on engaging people and reducing threats, progress is, however, lagging for targets associated with enhancing resilience. It takes little time to destroy habitats, but it does take considerable time to recover species and to restore our ecosystems. We need to be patient and remain vigilant in our efforts. We also need a much greater commitment to pursue nature-based solutions that will address the twin issues of biodiversity loss and climate change. Such a commitment will provide significant benefits for people and their health and safety as we pursue a green economy, living and prospering within the means of nature. That remains a huge opportunity we must pursue, and at a scale that will truly make a difference as we renew our Ontario Biodiversity Strategy. The following 4 targets, for which little progress was achieved, require much greater focus and implementation action as we look to the future. They include Target 10, the status of species and ecosystems of conservation concern in Ontario is improved. Target 12, natural heritage system plans and biodiversity conservation strategies are developed and implemented at the municipal and landscape levels. Target 13, at least 17% of terrestrial and aquatic systems are conserved through well-connected networks of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. We are currently at 10.7%. And note that globally and nationally, our targets are now 30% by 2030. We have a very long ways to go. And Target 14, programs and policies are in place to maintain and enhance ecosystem services. This is particularly important in a world with a rapidly changing climate. We need to be persistent and address these targets. In terms of improving knowledge, and most notably Target 15, we are making good progress. Just look at this report. But we still do not have a comprehensive, broad-scale and long-term monitoring program in place to track the state of Ontario's biodiversity through time. We do not have the equivalent of a Living Planet Index for Ontario. If what gets measured gets managed, then we need to do a much better job on measuring and monitoring. The bottom line is this: although we achieved 3 targets and made good progress on 8 others, we failed to achieve our overall targets for 2020. As I said previously, the global record and story on biodiversity repeats itself yet again in Ontario. We do have our work cut out for us as we look to 2030 and beyond. In terms of the overall state of Ontario's biodiversity, the results are again mixed, but there are some encouraging signs that our collective efforts are working. In comparison to our 2015 report, there are indeed a greater proportion of indicators showing positive trends. That is good news. We need to be buoyed by that and continue the effort. In terms of pressures on biodiversity, we have some encouraging signs. Our per capita ecological footprint, which is a macro indicator of the cumulative pressures we exert on biodiversity in terms of the amount of natural capital that we consume, has declined by close to 20%, which is very good news. This is largely a function of a substantially reduced carbon footprint, again attributed primarily to the closure of our coal-fired generating plants. Unfortunately, our per capita biocapacity has also declined, a function of a growing human population. Provincially, we are currently beyond the limits of our biocapacity to sustainably deliver the goods that we seek and produce. Stated differently, Our demands on biodiversity, particularly in the southern part of the province, are exceeding nature's ability to replenish itself. Projections of population growth and associated resource demands will further exacerbate that problem. Again, we are moving in the right direction, but we will need to continue to reduce our ecological footprint and the consumptive demands that we place on nature. Specific threats to biodiversity include habitat loss and fragmentation, invasive alien species, pollution, and climate change. We have been working hard to reduce these threats, again, with mixed results. The good news is that we are showing improvements in the reduction of some harmful pollutants released to the environment. We have seen much needed improvements in reducing the invasion rate of alien species, an issue for which we must remain vigilant. In contrast, some habitat loss indicators show continued deterioration with the net loss of both forests and wetlands in southern Ontario, south and east of the Canadian Shield. In contrast, the good news is that there has been a slight increase in natural cover on the Canadian Shield. We are also witnessing increased adverse effects of climate change, despite reduced provincial greenhouse gas emissions. Globally, greenhouse gases are still increasing. Indeed, we are expecting to see the threat of climate change to increase in the coming years and decades, and most acutely so in the far north. But even our southern Ontario ecosystems, both aquatic and terrestrial, will be at risk, as indeed will our human communities. Overall, pressures are the greatest in southern Ontario, where the vast majority of us live and where habitats have undergone the greatest loss and change. Pressures tend to decline as you go further north, with the notable exception of climate change impacts. In terms of the state of Ontario's ecosystems and species, yet again, we are showing mixed results, showing both improving and deteriorating trends. Not really surprising, given the size of the province and the geographic variability of pressures on our ecosystems. Efforts to improve the state of ecosystems and species of concern continue. However, we are still witnessing deteriorating trends in the southern part of the province, where habitat loss is most acute. More work is needed to achieve the positive outcomes we seek. By way of example, most species of conservation concern have remained stable since 2010, meaning there has been no change in their conservation status. However, some 20% were reassessed by COSERO as moving to a higher risk category, with 14% moved to a lower risk category. This is troublesome and speaks to why we must continue to reduce pressures on our species and ecosystems while we increase recovery and habitat protection and restoration efforts. In terms of species response, 72% of reptile species and 68% of freshwater mussels in Ontario are of conservation concern. 69% of mosses are deemed as vulnerable. That is troublesome. The good news is that some 80% of mammals and currently assessed insect species are classified as secure. In terms of conservation response, meaning conservation and stewardship action, we have some very positive news that we must now build upon. Most of our indicators are showing clear improvements. We had no indicators showing deterioration and a few showing no change. In that regard, more work is needed in terms of increasing protected areas and conservation lands in Ontario, which has lagged relative to our current target and global targets. We are at 10.7%, well below the new national and global targets of 30% by 2030. Similarly, greater progress is needed in terms of increasing natural heritage system plans across the municipalities of Ontario. These plans, if implemented, will also provide the multiple benefits we need for biodiversity, for climate, and for people, including our health, well-being, and safety from extreme weather events. We need to remember that the good stewardship and restoration work that is proliferating on Ontario's landscapes will reap very positive results for biodiversity, for climate, and for people, but it's going to take time. We need to build upon this foundation and expand the effort. Therein lays the hope for those of us on the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and by extension, for Ontario and its rich biodiversity. The pressures are real and growing, and Ontario's biodiversity is paying a heavy price, but we can slow down the rate of loss, and we can engage in a restorative and healing effort. But it will take all of us, Indigenous peoples, government, environmental groups, businesses, industry, and citizens, all working to reduce our pressures on nature and to engage in its enhanced stewardship. That is the essence of mainstreaming. That is why we need to get this message out and why we need your help. In conclusion, we have mixed yet encouraging results. Good progress is being made in the areas of engaging people and increasing conservation action and reducing threats and pressures. Yet there are lags in enhancing resilience and showing consistently positive biodiversity outcomes. Despite some meaningful progress, we failed to achieve most of our strategy targets. Clearly, we have more work to do. Ontario's biodiversity strategy has put us on the right path, and we are making progress, but more must be done, and the pace of activity greatly increase to reverse the curve of biodiversity loss, address climate change, and achieve a nature-positive Ontario as we work to live in harmony within nature. We need to make this everyone's business and ramp up our efforts to protect what sustains us. And we need your help. It's good, meaningful work. As for next steps, there is more to do as we look forward to the renewal of Ontario's biodiversity strategy to 2030. That will include the ongoing monitoring and reporting on Ontario's biodiversity, with the next report scheduled for release in 2025. That report will also outline progress against updated targets in a renewed version of Ontario's biodiversity strategy. And please remember this: protecting the diversity of life, of which we are an integral part, requires broad societal consensus and participation. It is a challenge not for some of us, but for all of us. Indeed, that is both the foundation for and the spirit of the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and an underlying driver to the renewal of the Ontario Biodiversity Strategy and implementation action. And yes, monitoring and reporting on the state of biodiversity will continue to be a core function of that effort. Thank you all.